This is always a fun night for me because I'm always very proud of the progress our students are making and their achievement. And this is another year, happily, where I can share with you a lot of good news, where we do see some areas that we want to maybe look more closely at. That's good too. So to take you through, these are the standardized assessments that our students participated in last school year, the 17-18 school year. PARCC, of course. And then these three high school level assessments that we did talk about last year, we're going to look at again. AP, the advanced placement tests, SAT and ACT, and it finally got a name, the science test. It doesn't roll off the tongue very easily, but it is the NJSLAS science assessment, and that's only for grades 5, 8, and 11. We're not going to look at data from that particular assessment. That was field tested last year. It was the first year of it. But we are going to look at the language arts and math from PARCC and some of the other data we have from the other high school level ones. The ACT information, we don't have the class of 18 profile yet to do all those comparisons that we like to do. This presentation, for those of you who've been on the board for some time, is a little earlier than it usually is. They changed a little something in the legislation about when this has to be, and it's actually 60 days from the date the platform opens for us to see the results. That was August 17th. So October 17th is the day before your next board meeting, so I couldn't do it that night because that would have been 61. So it's a little earlier now, and that's why we don't quite have everything that we might usually have for you. But we certainly have a lot of robust data to look at, so that's great. Okay, so we're going to start with PARCC and with English Language Arts. And what we're going to be able to look at now are the last 4 years. We have 4 years of data, which is really nice for us when we want to look longitudinally at how our kids are doing. So we start with this just very high-level look at our results. This is every grade that tested in language arts. And these are the 5 levels of proficiency that students could earn. 4s and 5s are considered proficient. That's where we want to see our kids in the level of meeting expectations or exceeding expectations. Those are in green. And then level 1, 2, and 3, those are not quite yet proficient. So those are in red. And again, very high level view, but what we see here when we look at the ELA scores are that the higher percentages are in the green. And so that's very good for us to see. We'll go grade by grade though. It's important to remember this is last year's grade 3. Okay, so these students are currently in grade 4. And each of these represents a different group of students. This was the 3rd grade in 2015, and then the 3rd grade in 16, and the 3rd grade in 17 and 18. So different students each time. That's one way of looking at the data. We look at the data in a lot of different ways. This is one way, and programmatically this helps us when we're designing courses of study, curriculum, to see sort of maybe where we might have some needs or need to look at something more closely in the course of study. And it's not atypical to see these lower percentages of proficiency in 3rd grade because this is the first time the students are taking a standardized measure. You'll see higher percentages in the other grades. Last year's 4th grade, they did not score as well. And we say they scored significantly lower than the 4th grade before them. I'm going to stop to just define significant. When I'm using the term significant here, I mean 4% or more. That's where we sort of drew the line to say that if we see a 4% or higher decline, we're going to say it's significant. Why did we pick 4%? If you take any grade level in our district, we have about 500, 550 kids in that grade level. 4% of that is about 20 to 22 students. So that's like a class size of students. So to say that an entire classroom of students would be having some sort of an issue or some sort of deficiency, that would be a significant thing for us. So that's why we drew 4 as the number. So where we see maybe a 1 or 2% decline, you don't want to get too crazy. It's good information to have. But certainly when we start to see 4 or even higher, like in this case, we do want to look more closely at what's going on. So I'm going to take a little bit longer here with this last year's grade 4. These are our current 5th graders. And last year, so I'm sure you all remember this, last year in math, we saw a very low score for this group of students when they were in 3rd grade. And we said, well, we have to see, because, you know, it's their first time as test takers and, you know, 3rd grade, let's see what happens. This year, we see that same group of students in language arts, as well as in math, showing us that we probably need to look pretty closely at where they're having some trouble and how we are going to design our interventions and tailor our instruction to meet their needs. So this 4th grade is significantly lower, or last year's 4th grade, significantly lower than the 4th grade before it. Last year's 5th grade, our current 6th, performed better than the 5th grade before them. Last year's 6th, and I'll stop here as well, you do see that 4% drop. That doesn't come as any surprise to us. Okay? In our English Language Arts program at the middle school, we did see a reduction in time. So we weren't surprised to see a little bit of a reduction here in the proficiency percentage. And I know Dr. Sargent and I have spoken about that. In the 7th grade, same thing. We saw a little decline in our middle school ELA performance. And in our 8th grade last year, they did go up a little bit, which was nice. Now I'm going to go back a slide. This 8th grade from last year was that 7th grade. So they were 80 and then 80. So they stayed where they had been. At the high school level, it always gets a little dicey, gets a little confusing. Graduation requirements come into play. And certainly if anybody's been following in the press, there's been a lot of talk about big changes to PARCC. And we're going to have less tests at high school, and the graduation requirements will get easier, and all of these things. And then we saw in the press, wait a minute, not so fast. I even think that was the headline, not so fast, right? So here we are sitting in our district waiting for, okay, what's happening? And, you know, my state people are telling me 3rd week of September we're going to release something. And now I know we're not going to hear anything until the state board meets again October 3rd. And I don't know what the changes will be. I don't know if they will sort of loosen the graduation requirements, if they will test only two times in high school instead of 6. I don't know what to expect. So we're all kind of waiting. But when we look at results from high school, that's sort of what contributes there, those graduation requirements, and whether or not students are saying, well, this is the one I have to focus on. And so, okay, I got that under my belt, whatever. And maybe they don't put the effort into the other assessments. There's always those issues going on. But as we look to last year, our 9th graders performed better than the 9th grade before them. Our 10th graders, look at that. Because for them, this was the requirement. Passing 10th grade started with this class, that they had to pass that one. And so we saw a nice jump, which is great. And last year's 11th, having had perhaps one under their belts, didn't maybe so much really give it their all, but they did perform better than the 11th grade before them. So all high school ELA went up, and that's a good thing. Now what we're going to look at, we're still with language arts, and we're still looking at the last 4 years. There's only the last 2 here because these kids only took 2. But we're going to look at how the students performed against themselves. So how many of them were proficient one year, and now the next were more proficient? And this is what I call a true cohort, because this graph, these graphs, will only show the students who took all of the assessments indicated on the graph. So if a student took this and then moved out of district, his score is not in this slide. He's pulled out of that number. Or if he wasn't here for this one but moved in and took this one, he's not in it. So this represents only those students who took both. And that's the truer way to look at this, so that it's just cleaner and it's more reliable. So these are our current 5th graders that I was just talking to you about, as a group of students who are showing us that we want to drill down into that data and really get to see what their needs are so we can meet them with interventions and tailored instruction. So when they were in third grade, 77% of them were proficient. And last year in fourth grade, only 68% of them were proficient. And so this is where we want to use the other data reports we get and manipulate whatever data we have in front of us to really try to group students in certain ways and design interventions for them that will meet their needs. What I also did, and I did this last year too because I do think it's interesting and I think it's good information to have, is I looked at kids who were proficient. They were a 4, but they weren't a strong 4. You know, because it's very easy when you see a decline, and certainly when you see what we're calling a significant decline, it's very easy to go, what happened? How were they proficient and now they're not? Well, we really do want to look at just how proficient were they. Okay, they got a 4, but was it like a strong 4? Were they sitting comfortably at 4? Or were they like just holding on to 4, barely proficient? And what I did was I took the 2 proficient ranges, the 4s and the 5s, and I divided them into a low, medium, and a high. So I have low, medium, and high 4, low, medium, high 5. That's 6 designations, right? 37% were all over here. So if I have 6 places to distribute these kids and 37% of them are sitting here, that's a big percentage to be sitting in that one spot. And so those low 4s, 12% of them then did dip down into being not proficient. And for some who were really hang on, that could be a question or 2. So again, just another way of looking at the data and another thing to consider as we try to make any kind of revisions or take any steps toward improving student achievement for these students. Our current 6th graders, they were in 5th last year, did well. They've been increasing. These are the same kids, and their proficiency is going up. That's what we want to see. Our current 7th graders, so these were last year's 6th, when I first started talking about how we saw a reduction in middle school ELA time. Last year's 6th, they did go down significantly, 5% in their own proficiency. And look at this, 44% of them were in the low 4 range. That's a lot. And almost a quarter of that 44% then did dip down into being not proficient. Our current 8th grade, this is interesting. So this is last year's 7th. And when we looked at how it did against the 7th before it, we saw that they were a little lower. And I mentioned the reduction in time again. But look at this. Even though they were lower than the 7th grade before them, themselves, they improved. They grew. And that's what we want to see. This is strong growth over the last 3 years. And I mentioned, just as a reminder, that our teachers' SGP scores are coming from growth like this. That's what they're looking at. How are the kids progressing that you teach? Current 9th graders who were in 8th grade last year, they also improved, and they've been nicely growing too, so that's great. Current 10th graders. Now, these kids, they have the current graduation requirement of you have to pass 10th grade PARCC. This was their 9th grade PARCC. So even though we see it go down from 8th grade to 9th grade, we can, say with a little bit of certainty, because we all know adolescents and we love those high school teenagers, that perhaps they were saying, well, this one isn't the one that I really need for graduation. So although 74 is not terrible, perhaps that contributed to that dip from 80 to 74. In any case, a third of them were in that low 4 section designation, and over a quarter of them then did dip down. Current 11th graders, who when they were in 10th grade knew that that was their graduation requirement, did perform well. They performed higher than they had in any year prior. And our current 12th graders, who just are still falling under the I just have to pass one of the PARCCs, they did fall off there, and we do traditionally see that happen. Little under a third of them were in that low 4 range, but over a quarter of that 30% did then dip down. Okay, we're going to move on to math. We're looking at the same kind of stuff. We have 4 years in math, all our grades here, 3 through 8, and then you have courses. High school courses are how the math exams are named. Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. We have the same 5 levels. 4 and 5 are still in green. They're the ones we want to see. Those are the proficient levels. And 1, 2, and 3 are in red. For math, as happened last year, but it is very slight, the higher percentages tend to be in the 3-4 rather than the 4-5 like they were in ELA. But our math results do look good. But bird's eye view, we do see them a little bigger here rather than over here. So we go grade by grade in math now. Last year's 3rd grade performed better than the 3rd grade before. So that went up. Last year's 4th grade, here's that class. So when they were in 3rd grade, this was them, they dipped down significantly. I showed you this last year. And that's when I said, that's just, a group of kids we're going to watch because it's their first test. Who knows? So there they were. And now here we see them again below the 4th grade before them now, significantly. So we've been, talking to the teachers, the supervisors. Everyone is on it. And everyone is looking at all the information we have and their current work in their classes to really tailor the instruction to meet their needs. This is last year's 5th. Had a nice jump over the 5th before them. Last year's 6th also went up. Last year's 7th went up. Last year's 8th went up. Last year's Algebra 1 went up. Last year's Geometry went down 1%. Again, we don't really want to get too crazy about 1%. Good information to have, and we have all the same kind of data on them, so we can drill down and see if there was a particular area or a domain or a skill set that really needs our attention. But just that little tiny dip, and Algebra 2 went up. So with the exception of that current 5th grade class I keep talking about, and the elementary teachers in the audience are like, yes, we know. With the exception of that group of kids and this tiny little drop here in geometry, all of the math went up. So that was nice. Now we look at the cohorts for math. Here's our current 5th grade. Not significant, but a decline. So they are down from 73 to 71. And since we're focusing so much on them, we do want to consider this decline. Current 6th graders, growing each year very nicely. Current 7th graders, so last year they were in 6th grade math. They had a significant dip. Okay, and they even are below where they were a couple years back. And when we look at this way of looking at the data, 43%, very high percentage to all be in that low 4 category. And look at that, over a quarter of those kids then did slip down. They were the ones who slipped down into non-proficiency. Current 8th graders went down, but again, that's just 2. Good information to have, but don't want to get too crazy. And now I want to remind you, you see up here, these are current 9th graders, but when you hit then, when you finish 8th grade algebra or finish 7th grade math, you can follow a different trajectory. Okay, so some 8th graders last year, current 9th, some took 5th grade math, 6th grade math, 7th grade math, and 8th grade math. Okay, they tend to be our lower performing math students because you could also go from 7th grade math to Algebra 1, and we'll look at them next. But let me tell you, for this group, this is tremendous growth. That is wonderful. And that is really, really a credit to the work our middle school teachers are doing, because that's great to see. This is a tough group. And now here's that other group of current 9th graders who went 5, 6, 7, and then took Algebra 1, and you can't get better than that. So very pleased to see that. Okay, our current 10th graders who followed this trajectory of 6, 7, 8 before Algebra 1 grew nicely and have been growing nicely. Current 10th graders who were in the 6, 7 Algebra 1 and then Geometry had a little dip there, but we're still up at 93%. So it's not significant, and we can certainly look at this data. Also, what I'll mention is for this class, Algebra 1 is the current graduation requirement. So when they took these tests, they knew that, and they knew Algebra 1 is the one I have to do well on. And Geometry was not going to be a graduation requirement for them. So, you know, whether that figures into their test-taking psyche or not. Current 11th graders who did 7 and 8 before Algebra 1 and Geometry did significantly dip. But again, when we look here, we're talking a very high percentage of them were not comfortably proficient. They were very low, and over half of the ones who were very low then were the ones who were not proficient. And that's not to say, you know, well, that's the reason and like close the book. It's just to sort of explain that we don't want to go too crazy when we see they were so proficient. Well, maybe they weren't so proficient. So we really do need to focus on their skills and their needs. And then the current 11th graders who went 7th to Algebra 1 and Geometry and Algebra 2, they dipped, and we would say significantly because that's 4%. But my little asterisk there tells you it's a difference of 4 students that makes that percentage go down. So we don't want to get too crazy about that either, I guess. Again, just good information to have. And we can look at the 4 students and be able to work with them and remediate any issues that we might see, any patterns. Our current 12th graders who took 8th grade math and then took Algebra, Geometry, and Algebra 2, we do see this. This is not atypical to see this very big dip by that time in high school. And over a quarter in that low 4, and almost 60% of those low 4 kids were the ones who did go down to being not proficient. So those are the PARCC results. And now I'm going to move on to a couple of data measures for high school students. Advanced placement courses, these are the courses we offer. Dr. Sargent made it very clear she wanted to add more high school AP courses, and so this is a new addition, English Language and Composition. So we don't actually, this is the first year we're offering it. We don't have data for this test figured in, but the rest we do. Advanced placement courses, again, just to remind you, are courses students take to prepare them to take an advanced placement test, the passing of which grants them advanced placement into college courses. So it's a 5-point scale. It's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and colleges will be accepting 3s, 4s, and 5s into their college courses. So one way we look at the AP performance is the percentage of students who received a 3, 4, or a 5. And as we did last year, we compare our numbers, we're in blue, we compare our percentages against the nation and the state and the comparable high schools. That information doesn't become available until quite a bit later in the school year. We have to wait for the school performance reports to come out to get that. But happily, we see ourselves performing higher than we did last year. A higher percentage of our kids got 3s, 4s, or 5s from last year, so that's good. And we are well above the nation and the state in terms of our percentage of kids receiving those scores. We can also look at our AP performance in terms of the average score. And our average score is in green, and our average score has been I'd say kind of the same, and then up and up again. I am also this year, it was not available last year, the state data, but I am able this year to show you our average score against both the nation and the state, and we are still significantly higher. Not using the same definition of significant anymore, but I'm going to say that's significant. Moving on to some SAT data that we always like to look at. We are in blue. I only right now have the state average score. So our average score of 1164 and the state of 1103. Nation and comparable high schools I don't have yet. I'm hoping this will look very similar to how it has looked other years, and we've been higher than both of them. So we're here at 1164. Down a bit from last year's 1171. And we can look back and we can say, oh, we've seen little dips each year in our own composite scores. And there could be a variety of reasons for that as well. ACT is really gaining in popularity, so if stronger test-taking students are moving over to that test as opposed to SAT. But in any event, hopefully we are still going to see us and our performance higher than those other comparative groups. And that, as I said, I don't have the ACT yet, and we didn't do for science, so that pretty much is my analysis. Certainly, Dr. Sargent, if you have anything to say, or I'll just take some questions, up to you.